Folks, welcome to a special edition of the Jake Feinberg Show. And as I continue to communicate with spirits that have been in this universe before we ever came and will be here long after we are gone, it is always important to understand that the roots of music lie with the rhythm of the drum, which comes from Africa. And I get a chance today to speak to one of the most gifted session drummers, but a cat that also has tremendous feel and dexterity on the bandstand because he was able to play live. Maybe he was playing for pizza and hot dogs, but he was playing live and he was getting used to playing his own and creating his own individual sound. And he turned it into a career in the studios. Live from Nashville, Ron Krasinski, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Jake, it's a real pleasure to be here. Thanks, man.
I just wanted to kind of ask you about the fusing. Your heyday, when you were coming up in the 50s and early 60s, to my ear, jazz and blues were very much attached at the hip. I listen to jazz today, modern jazz, and to me it's very classicalized. There's more European classical form stuff in there than there is African rhythms. And I wanted to ask you about the fusing of jazz and blues in the 50s and what was intoxicating about that for you.
Well, I can tell you right off the bat, and I can remember this from my earliest days, even possibly in a crib, and that was the groove. I found the groove to be intoxicating. My parents would leave the radio on, and there was just something about that pulse, and it was hypnotic. And at an early age, I mean, it just takes you right out there, and you get into a meditative state of mind right off the bat. And even, people want to meditate, it's that groove, it's that pulse. It makes people dance. It makes people relax. It communicates with every living thing. And I just found it very intoxicating, listening to songs, and I said, I knew from a very early age I was going to play music for the rest of my life because it attracted me so hard, and I wanted to be a part of it, and I wanted to contribute to it, and try to understand what it was all about. Why did it make me feel so good? Why does it make other people feel so good? Why does it transcend all barriers of people?
Right.
People who don't speak the same language, people who don't have the same customs, can live in totally different environments, yet it touches them both in very similar ways and makes them react. And I really wanted to know what that is. And I still don't know exactly what it is. I have a better understanding of it.
Yeah.
But I know all of those reasons were right. And I still find it intoxicating and hypnotic, even now. And it's a way of life. I play music to keep myself together.
I mean, I wanted to ask you, about this. What I hear in my ears, the language of bebop was being created. Charlie Parker, Diz,
sure.
Moody, those cats, it just seemed that the blues was right alongside the jazz in the 50s and 60s. I mean, you talk about the groove. Can you talk about some of the, the early drummers that you got off on?
Well, yes, I sure can. When I first started getting into music in the early 50s, I used to like to listen to Lloyd Price and
sure.
Fats Domino, those guys, the New Orleans guys. And that drummer was Earl Palmer, who I later got to meet in Los Angeles. And Earl was one of the Wrecking Crew guys, as a matter of fact. He had helped playing with the drummers. And yeah, those I really enjoyed that. And let me think. And of course, there were just so many. Once I started getting into it, although Earl and those guys, they could groove very hard. Then I started getting a little more complexity, like the Philly Joe Joneses of the world, the Elvin Joneses of the world, the Buddy Riches of the world, who could take that groove and start subdividing it into all these rhythms and counter rhythms and just make it so exciting.
I dig.
There's guys, there's guys that can just play quarter notes, one after another, and make it just as exciting as guys playing 30-second notes. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, this is at the crux of my show is this idea that it's come into formation for me that it's about you can keep time, like you said, and play 30-second notes, or you can play the song. I mean, I feel like without ever seeing you play live, I feel like you were one of these cats that was always trying to play the song, which means that you're playing quarter notes constantly. I mean, you're just doing it. And this is like pre-Tony Williams. I'm curious about this. If there's, this idea, because I mean, listen, I got to interview Alan Toussaint before he passed on, and he was playing with Earl Palmer before he went to L.A. and Earl was coming up before labels. I mean, to him, it was a groove. It was just you had to find, maybe he'd say, it's like a walking groove, or it's a, it was done more as a mood thing than anything related to genres or labels. And I just wanted you to talk about subdivision and playing the song. I mean, was that a natural thing for you? And if you can remember, some of the early experiences where you got used to doing that.
Well, when I first started doing studio work was around 1963. I think I was 14 years old at the time, and my parents wanted me to be a classical musician, an orchestra musician. So I had a lot of good schooling, and I could read very well. But I just found the drum kit so much fun because of that pulse, that groove, the way guys could play perfectly on records. I said, gee, how did they play it so perfect every time? Of course, later on I learned you do several takes until you get it right. But, the deal is yes, you play the song, and I've made a great career out of it, and the deal is you learn you get into the artist's head. Every session is different. Every artist is different, and every song that artist does is somewhat different. So you get into, let me hear what the lyric is. What are you trying to convey here? What are you hearing? Tell me what this song is about. What kind of energy is it? And then you just let your creative juices take over, and you start playing with the other guys, and you create something. You create something out of an idea, and then it becomes something physical, because music is physical. It's vibrations in the air. It's physics. It's all math. It affects people in a physical way because of the vibrations that it creates.
But not all bass players do well with drummers who like to play the song.
Well, certain guys play together. It's a concept of where the beat is. Okay.
Right.
I like to, for example, I like to sit on the backbeat. I like to keep my backbeat a little bit further back. To me, it makes it groove harder. I discovered when I started writing music in the 90s, I was doing it on a computer, and you could see how things could be quantized. And I said, okay, perfect time is when everything lines up to zeros. And I said, well, how does it look when I play it for real, and then see where everything lays?
Right.
Which I did. I would play it on the pads and into the computer, and then I would look and see where everything fell. And I noticed the kick drum is usually right on, the hi-hat is right on. The snare drum is always about 5 ticks back, depending on the tempo. It's always just back a little bit. You can tell the difference. I can tell by listening to something if it was done mechanically or if it was done by a real guy, just by where that backbeat lays. If it's a little edgy, I say, that's a drum machine. You know what I mean?
What do you mean by what does edgy mean to you?
Well, it means the backbeat sits a little more, and it makes it more relaxed.
Yeah. I might call it more sterile. I mean, I think this is really important for younger drummers because, I mean, you've had essentially digital music's crushed into the ears of so many people and kids for the last two decades or so. And your generation had peer role models and you know, cats before you that you idolized that were, I mean, you can transcribe an Elvin Jones solo, but that doesn't mean you can play it with the feeling. I mean, you have to merge it with feel.
That's right.
I mean, you know, it's
right.
You know, I mean, like I interviewed Dave Liebman a few weeks ago, and he was like, it's hard for younger students today because they have to learn the history. There's a saturation of material out there, and then on top of that, they're trying to come up with new stuff. I mean, it was almost better when we weren't all interconnected, and you didn't, you know, there were no jazz schools. You know, you were making.
That's right.
Can you talk about?
And I'll tell you. No, I'll tell you what there was back then that there isn't now as well, and that's like 5-6 night a week gigs.
Of course.
Where you played with the same guys every night, 5-6 nights a week, boom, 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 for weeks. And those gigs, unfortunately, aren't around anymore. And man, that's where you learn to play. That's where you learn to play with each other and find that common groove. Every now and then I'll take on a student, and I talk to them about time, and I said, listen, think of time, think of the pulse as a bouncing basketball, rather than something digital with corners, up, down, up, down. Think of it as boom, boom, it bounces. And that's what makes people dance. It makes you kind of bounce to that thing. And who knows why it is or what it is, but that's what I've learned is, you know, it's a circle. Music, the groove is in circles, not angles.
You know, I was just transcribing this interview I did with a guitar player, Papa Mali, and he plays with Bill Kreutzmann, who is the drummer for the Grateful Dead, the main drummer. And I wanted to read you this quote and get your because him and Bill have gotten close, and Bill also listened to a lot of Fats Domino's records. But one thing that Bill told Papa, he said, when you're in the middle of a free jam and you lose your way and you don't know where you are, just remember any note can be the one. There's so much emphasis in R&B and funk music to know exactly where the one is, and this is so you can count time properly. But in my world, things can get so free and out there that sometimes that any note can be the one. If you count from that point on, it will eventually come back around to where it's supposed to be. In the meantime, you don't fight it; you just flow with it. And so, can you talk about that philosophy in your own career? I think this is to me the essence of it. Any note can be the one.
Well, I sure can. And when you're playing in free form, I mean, you don't think about the idea is not to think about what you're doing. It's just get into what you're hearing and play to what you're hearing, and let the circles go around and come around. When I first moved to L.A., I got my first gig there was with a band called the Don Ellis Band.
Oh.
And it was a band of many different time signatures, and I call them time cycles because a song would have a subdivision of like 3-2-2, 3-2-2, 3-3-2-2. Okay,
right.
And you had to play that, and you learned how you could play 4 over that. You could play 3s over that. And then, when you're in 4 or you're in 3, you see how you could play that over that. And you see these gigantic circles that start to happen. It's like when you're playing 4-4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you get into 3s over, da, 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 da. That's another circle. Now you can get into 5s over it. You can get into 7s over it. And then you can take those 5s and 7s and start subdividing them into 2s and 3s. And you get these gigantic circles that happen. And I played with one musician who was just a master of that, and that was Pat Martino. Pat could take it to the end of the solar system. He could take it all the way out there, and then bring you right back to the block you're on in Philadelphia. and could just go and feel free. You jumped off the cliff, and you're out there, and you're out in the middle of space, and all these things are happening, or these circles going around, and then all of a sudden, slam, bam, you're right back to one again, and you don't have to think about it. It just happens. And that's free-form play. But you're right. When you're in the studio and you're doing songs and doing tracks, well, then it's about execution. It's making the needles go to the same place on the board. One lesson I learned when I first started recording pop things a lot was, I remember an engineer told me, he said, listen, try to put as much energy into one note and where you place it as if you were playing, 16th notes over something. Just put the energy into one note in the right place. And that's different. That's different. Then it's more about execution and playing, the song. But when you're into free-form playing, which I just love to do, man, that's letting go.
Yeah, I mean, to me, like, that's all I want to talk to Krasinski about. I mean, I think it's classic. Like, this morning, I got off the phone with you, and my older daughter's like, who is that? I said, oh, this guy, Ron Krasinski, and she's like, what's he doing? I'm like, well, he's on his way to go do a jingle. And, she thought it was funny,
yeah.
But, and so, that has to be more formulaic. I really...
Absolutely.
I want you to just try to talk to younger cats who, I know it's 38. My generation, younger generations, more sensitive, less places to play. You don't have, listen, you go to Jimbo's Bop City in San Francisco in the 50s, and, you could try to get up. Miles Davis was playing, and you could try to get up on the bandstand and take Philly Joe's spot, but if you couldn't keep time, they just walk off the stage. So, what I'm trying to say is, like, more insecurity, more emphasis on needing to know where the one is, more formulaic stuff, and they're fighting it instead of flowing with it. Can you talk about a time in your career where you were fighting it and you just eventually flowed with it and how you worked it out?
Well, it is. It's all about working things out. And especially, like, every time I go into a recording studio, and I've been there thousands of times, you learn something. You're going to learn something different every time. Everything you do is kind of a puzzle, and you have to figure it out. It's never, okay, it's going to be just like it was yesterday. It's a new day, it's new stuff, it's new people, and you just have to relax and go with it. The thing is, it's like anything else in life. Don't tense up about it, and don't fixate on what you don't know. Take what you do know and build on what you have. Start with basics. Always start simple. You can always build up from simple. But if you start complex, well, the only place to go is backwards.
But with Don Ellis, was there a period where, was it a little bit frustrating at first, or did it just, I guess...
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I knew Don's material backwards and forwards before I even went into the band. And I moved to L.A., and I noticed, I got a call that said, Don Ellis is auditioning drummers. And I said, really? So I had only been in L.A. like a week or so. And I knew the material, and I went there, and my sight reading is even to this day, is spot on. And I just played it, straight ahead. The good thing for me was, in that band, was like Tom Scott, Roger Kellaway, Chuck DeMonico, John Clemmer, all these really hot players, especially in the studio scene in L.A. By the next week, I was at Warner Brothers doing films, just by virtue of knowing those guys. But I found it it was very challenging music to play. But see, I like that. I like to be challenged. I like for the red light to come on and say, okay, game's on. Here we go. No mistakes. I like to tell the story of, like, when you're doing a film date and you're there with an orchestra, and you're reading the thing down. If somebody makes a mistake, the conductor doesn't ask you what you played. He asks the copyist what he wrote there. Because it's assumed you played exactly what was on the paper. And that's the deal. So I like that, because then everybody's knife is really sharp, and you're on your game. And Don's material was like that. And Don did a thing as well. And this is something that I haven't seen since, and I think it's a great idea. He had flute fluid arrangements. In other words, the song had letters, you know what I mean?
Sure.
And different sections, different motifs. And Don would hold up a finger and say, we're going to go to motif 3, okay? And then count us in, and boom. So the chart was different every time you played it. It's wherever he wanted to take you next. And a guy could be playing a solo, and we could go to another section that would be underneath his solo. And I thought it was just a great idea. They were fluid arrangements. You could move them around like pieces of a puzzle. And I thought it was a great idea. And man, I've never seen that since. So I don't know why.
What you have no theories as to why you've never seen that since?
I have absolutely no idea. I thought it was a great idea.
Yeah.
I said, wow, man, this way it's like it's something new every time. You know, and of course, playing that kind of music, man, you were on your toes anyway. There was no time to look out in the audience and see who was out there. Man, you had to really have your laser focus on, you know.
Well, I've interviewed everybody. I've interviewed Kellaway, Clemmer, and Tom Scott, Chuck Domenico.
And he passed away.
He did,
wow.
But Ray Neapolitan is a car salesman now on the West Coast. He's another cat.
Right.
But I've done Emil Richards. I mean Krasinski. I cannot believe that What year did you move to L.A.?
What year did I leave L.A.?
No, what year did you move to L.A.?
Oh, 1972. It was the end of 1972.
Are you kidding me? I mean, this is I had no idea. I thought you were, because when was 1-2 Free made? It
was made in February of 1972 at RCA in New York.
Did you fly back for that, or did you leave right after that session?
No, it wasn't too long after that I left for LA. I did I think I did another record with Eric Kloss after that as well. But yeah, it was right after that I left for LA. I knew I wanted to go there because I wanted to do film work. I knew I could do it well, and I for all the years I lived in LA, I always had great TV and movie work. Aside from and then I would tour with the groups that I went out with. When I first got there, like I said, that was Clemmer, and I played in Roger Kellaway's band, which was great as well. And I still see Roger. We just did a thing together. It was last year, I think, with the Asheville, North Carolina Symphony. It was a night of Paul McCartney music, and Roger wrote a special piece, and we got to play together again. It was great.
That is because I spent our interview talking music concrete. He did this thing where he was doing electronic music, and then he had Mel Lewis and the bass player actually on headphones listening to the electronic music while they were playing a gig at some library in New York. But I mean, those cats are. I can't. So I mean, because the time period you're talking about is like this amazing period of like post hard bop. Like it was really like edgy and electronic music was coming into form. But going back for a minute, I want to know from Krasinski the first gig that you had that where you were like you were woodshedding on the bandstand 5-6 nights a week, maybe you'd tour in and around the Pennsylvania, Indiana area, and who was in the band and the kind of tunes you were playing. This is obviously like pre-professional.
When I was younger?
Yeah, absolutely.
When I was I was in rock bands. I played in rock bands.
Right.
I remember playing in Motown bands because you do your casuals on weekend where you play your standards, things like that, with a few of the jazzers. There were a couple of guys in Pittsburgh who played jazz very well that I got to know back then, and they were very encouraging for me. And I don't know if you know these guys. One was Joe Negri, who became famous on the Mr. Rogers show as Handyman Negri. So
he was a jazz player. That dude was a jazz player.
Absolutely.
Oh my God, that is legendary.
Still around and still playing.
Oh my God, continue, please.
Indeed.
Yeah, so he was.
And
there
was
ahead.
another guy named Johnny Costa, who actually did the music for that show. And these guys, they were good improvisers. See, what I liked about it was the improvisational aspect of it. Because to be able to do that, I mean, first of all, you got to have some chops, which means you had to work on it.
Sure.
You can't just come into it being just starting playing and say, okay, improvise. You know, you got to have some tools. You got to have some good sharp tools in your toolbox to be able to go those places that you're thinking. Okay, because like I said, when you get into that kind of playing, you just let go. You don't think about where you're going. You just go where the music takes you. So you got to have tools to be able to do that. So that's what attracted me about that. And then I saw guys, like Earl Palmer, Hal Blaine, these guys. And in New York, there was
Was it Ed Shaughnessy?
Well, yeah, Ed was a good one as well.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But these guys who were jazz players, but then they could. Gary Chester is the guy I was thinking about in New York.
Gary Chester.
And Panama Francis.
Yeah, sure.
Those guys, man. But what they did, they knew how to take all of their energy and put it into playing simple, okay? Because they played on pop records as well. But what they had was the feel. It was all about the feel, and it still is about the feel. That's why they call them basic tracks when you go into the studio. You've got just the rhythm section. You're not playing the whole song. You're just there for the rhythm section. And, it's like, what tracks do they pick? Yeah, that track felt great. That's the criteria.
Right.
How does the track feel? And it still is. It's still all about that.
But you have to. I mean, like just taking for example the sessions with Eric 1 2 3. You guys were all in the studio cutting that. There were no overdubs on that.
Oh no, that's playing straight up, man.
Right. I mean, because that. I want to know. Well, okay. So the first. There's just so many questions I have, but I guess your first what was your first jazz gig? I mean, you played in pop rock bands. Obviously, you did the top 40 stuff, which, and all that. But I mean, what was the first jazz gig? I mean, talk about
my first jazz gig. Yeah, my first real jazz gig was probably I was about 18 years old, I guess, and I was in the military.
Sure.
Because I got drafted in 1966, and I got into an Air Force band where there were a lot of young guys. And here we're all listening to Miles and Coltrane. This is 1966.
Oh my God!
And these guys, so we would just get together and play. And even though it wasn't a gig in a place, like a club or anything, we did a lot of playing. Anytime we had a chance, boy, we'd be playing. You just take a song. You take a song, and then you start improvising. You play the head, which takes about 60 seconds, and then you spend 20 minutes improvising on that. and it's like oh man, this is just great. And then when I got out, and then I met Eric, and of course then I met Pat, and we did a lot of playing together. And then of course then when I moved to the West Coast, I got to play with Roger, who was another absolute monster. And I played with John Clemmer for a while, and a lot of those West Coast jazz guys, man.
I'm just curious. Then
I started, just getting so busy in the pop field, I didn't play much jazz anymore until I started getting more into Latin music, which to me is kind of the same mindset. It's that same rolling feel. And you can play busy. You can play a lot of notes. You can play with a lot of finesse, and at any rate, But those were my main jazz influences at the time. But when I first started playing gigs at the age of 14, it was all rock and roll, man. But it wasn't really rock and roll then. It was more like it was R&B. I'll say it was R&B.
But yeah, you were getting off on guys like Benny Benjamin and
Benny Benjamin, my goodness, man, all those fills like that starts out with "Ain't Too Proud to Beg." Oh man, I still do Motown. I'm doing a Motown show this weekend. As a matter of fact, I still play with Little Anthony, and I do a lot of Motown acts.
Wow.
I'm doing. I've got the Drifters coming up. I've got the Temptations coming up, and because I like that feel, and man, those Benny Benjamin, just that same lick. God, I could play it in my sleep. And yeah, I love that stuff.
Well,
I just love that stuff. He's one of my heroes. My goodness.
The Air Force Base was located where?
In Rapid City, South Dakota, Strategic Air Command Base.
So, I mean, you're like, I mean, can you, I'm as a radio journalist. I mean, I'm obsessed with freeform radio, which really was at its height when you were playing your ass off with Don Ellis in L.A. in those days. But could you say that Coltrane's modal stuff was the stuff that you were listening to on the radio? Like, I mean, you were playing modal.
No, I never heard it on the radio.
It never got aired. It never got. Did you remember? Because I've interviewed Jimmy Cobb, and I've done all the and Cobb said that when Train started to play the thesaurus of scales and just losing it and channeling all this stuff. He said people would get up in the audience and be like, "Make him stop! They called it hate music. I mean, journalists called it hate music, and this. And I want to know what your interpretation was that, because they were just channeling what they felt. Like we're talking about feel. Train was channeling what he felt, but yet by the mainstream press, it was called hate music.
Well, it's because they're a little behind, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're even more behind now, but yeah, you're right, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, come on, you just listen to it. And, I mean, God, I thought first time I heard Coltrane scared the heck out of me. I heard those guys playing, I'm going, my goodness, this just, makes you shiver.
Right.
It's just so intense. And you go, my goodness, what are they doing? Then you get a better understanding for it, and then you start delving into it, and you see that how good they were at it, and it's just incredible, man. Yeah, but it wasn't on the radio back then. You had to go out and find it. You had to go out and get your records. Like you read all these, especially I'm sure you ever interviewed some of the English musicians who back in the 50s, they gathered together to listen to records because it was such a rare thing to get hold of records, because you didn't hear that stuff on the radio. And so out of those guys, there comes your Eric Claptons, there comes your Jimmy Pages, there comes your Lennon and McCartneys. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. No, you're spot on. It's funny. People might scoff at this because they don't really know him, but when I listen to Klaus, man, that dude was channeling. I mean, he borrowed from the heaviest jazzers and then added his own accent. Do you remember the first time that you saw him play live?
Okay, the first time Eric and I met, I had just gotten out of the military, and I was going to move to Los Angeles. Were my plans. But I went back to Pittsburgh to see my family, and I had known about Eric, but I felt like playing. I said, I feel like playing. Who can I call? So I called Eric. I said, well, let's get together and play. And just the two of us got together, and we must have played for 4 hours straight without stopping. And it was so intense. It was just, we finished, and it was like, okay, smoke a cigarette, you know what I mean?
Buckets of sweat. Yeah, just unbelievable. Yeah. Unbelievable.
It was so intense, and Eric says, I want you to record with me. I said, oh, okay, all right, sounds good. And we did. We did, I think, 3 or 4 records together. And we played live. We did some college concerts with Pat. And I know 1, 2, 3, that's Dave Holland playing bass, and Ron Thomas, who you know as well. And but that's the first time I met Eric, and it was like magic. It was like a rocket ship going up in the air, man. It was pretty intense.
What did you? What was unique about? I hate to speak about him in the past tense, but his career is a bit dormant now. I mean, what was it about his playing that helped you stretch out too? I mean, how did you grow from him?
Well, it was the way things just kept going up in intensity. Just when you thought it couldn't get any more intense, it would get more intense. And then you start learning to play with each other, playing off of each other, playing lines together with each other, and saying how not necessarily what you played, but going for the intensity and the energy. was the target. Not the technical aspect of the music, but the energy and the intensity of it. That was the target, and you just go with that. And I got to tell you, man, it was, to this day, it's like, it's hard to equal that. It's hard to equal that. And you don't hear a whole lot of music like that anymore. Music has become very much refined, and there's not that free form of just, okay, we don't have to play the song perfectly, but we're, the Coltrane state of mind, I call it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've dedicated my professional life the last 5 years to this idea that music has music is made for pacification now. It's not made for visceral, burning, emotive. I mean, Art Blakey used to say, my job as a drummer is to wash away the dust of everyday life for those cats that come in after a hard day of work, and, he'd blow you out of the water, and that's the way you guys were doing it too. And it's like, it was about, I am very fascinated by these enclaves and regional families. I mean, if you read the liner notes from 1, 2, Free, you guys literally became a working unit, almost like a family. I mean, you were traveling and gig.
It was.
Eric
and I were even living together. We had a house out in the country. My wife was there, and my little baby, and Eric lived there. And it was a hang for musicians. Whoever was in town came and stayed out at the house, and there was music going on 24 hours a day. There was always people playing.
Well, who used to come out there?
Well, Pat used to come out there. Barry Miles and his brother Terry.
Sure, you got them both. I've interviewed them both.
Yeah.
I guess the other thing is this: you could not. This is not just. I mean, like, I am not from your generation. I've met Pat. I actually went to his brownstone in Philly. We hung. It was cosmic. But to me, it's like the quality of the people. I mean, you could have conversations post-session that were equally as cosmic as the session itself.
Oh, yeah.
These are genius cats.
Absolutely.
Genius cats.
You're already out there. Sure, you're already out there. Whatever you say, it's like you're already in that zone. And it's surprising. I mean, you learn about life. You learn about, the life force that exists in us. And, what is it? I don't think we even still know what it is. But getting to those realms, those deep thoughts, those very deep thoughts. And, it's intense. When you're done playing, even now, any gig, it's like you need wind down time because you're buzzing. You're just buzzing with excitement and those realms of dealing with esoteric things that take you out to the edges of the universe, and it's great.
I don't want to keep you longer than you have to. But I do have a lot more to do.
Okay.
Do we have to? Are you ready to? Are you have to bounce out of here?
I have to go.
Okay.
Yes, I do. I have to run.
All right. Well,
but, we'll do this again.
All right. I'll just send me an email and let's friend on Facebook. But let's try to do this real soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jake. It's been a real pleasure, man.
I had a ball.
Thanks to you and your listeners.
All right, Ron.
Thanks to all of you people.
Take care, brother.
Bye.
Later.